So to get to rangeland analysis platform from any web page that, a search engine, as long as you type in rangeland analysis platform, it'll come up with a rangeland app that simply just click on the app, comes to the home page of rangeland analysis platform. Previously, we talked about looking at Production Explorer, which was a product that you could look at vegetative growth through many years of collected data. Today, we're going to look we're going to look at partner tools and look at historical imagery to see how landscape has changed. And this is called Landscape Explorer. You can see that it's kind of giving you an example of what the product looks like. If you want to do a little more self-investigation under how to use, it talks a little bit more about what the product does, why it was set up, how it's an interactive map that looks back to imagery that dates back into the 50s up until just recently. And so when we zoom in on an area, you can actually see how the landscape has changed. There's some instructions there that you can use kind of depending upon whether you're on a laptop or maybe even on a desktop machine, how to go ahead and navigate through this particular device or this particular program. It's simply a drag across the screen product. In other words, from the left side will be the older imagery to the right side being the newer imagery as you move the drag bar across the screen, and you'll see how the landscape has changed through time. Again, just more instructions on how to do that. Some of the different products that they have shown as far as examples with, in this case, in Townsend, Montana, looking at how the landscape has changed through time and even urban expansion there along that particular location. So let's go back to the top to where the product is again, and here is another device that you can use, or another piece of this called Lost Landscapes. And woody encroachment is certainly one of the things that we use this tool for, and to really kind of map how things have changed when it comes to that feature of vegetation at the surface, primarily woody encroachment, because we see that as a kind of a nationwide issue. There's a description of why that is an issue as a part of this particular piece of the Landscape Explorer. More trees aren't always good, depending upon their location on the landscape. It kind of gives you an example of how they've tracked some of that change through the years. And those, again, are just a kind of a reflection of when trees become dominant in a certain pixel size of that imagery that they're looking at. Here's an example then, as we dove in across to, again in Montana. Before woody encroachment, you can see that probably because of the soils, I'm just going to quickly drag this across from the right to the left. So this is new imagery of the Blackfoot River. And what you're seeing on the left-hand side is soils that should have, let me go back to the right-hand side first. Soils that should support and where trees should exist. And what we have seen over time then from the 50s up to the present date, probably this imagery is probably around 2020, how those trees have expanded then away from what their historic site or location was to now inhabit an area over here that is probably been devoid of any prescribed burning or any kind of management that would keep those trees from expanding. So you can see there's probably different management, land management at the surface going on here. Some are trying to prevent those trees from expanding while other management is allowing that to happen. So that's an example of woody encroachment. again, gives you a little bit about the history of the cost of why we're tracking some of these changes, what it does to the landscape, how it's affecting water infiltration, all the different things that are costing money. Here's another example of this is in Lusk Canyon region of Nebraska, and you can see on the as we drag this and look at the historical imagery of the 1950s, we can see that in these draws we're starting to see eastern red cedar develop. If we could pass that across then to where we presently are today, we can really see how eastern red cedars now are the plant that's driving the system. So infiltration, plant community change, available forage for livestock has all been impacted by the presence of eastern red cedar. Pretty dramatic when you look at this particular landscape in the Lusk Hills of Nebraska. Northeast New Mexico, again, kind of the same thing. We're talking about a pretty arid environment here. We go back and look at where these plants were in the past, probably in soils that would support that and maybe were historic back in the 50s of having any kind of juniper cover on there. Now we can see how that is starting to spread further back into an area that was once devoid of any woody component primarily. We'll go back up and look at just some other uses of this particular tool and see that even if we want to look at how around cities or any kind of occupation by people have seen and maybe caused some change. Look at Fort Collins here, drag this across. From the 1950s, we can see that on the left-hand side, kind of the foothills of the Rocky Mountains there in the front slope or the front range of the Rockies. Fort Collins wasn't very large, and as we see how population has increased along that front range of the Rockies, we can see that what was probably ag land or Forest Service land or Bureau of Land Management land is now pretty much occupied by the expansion of the city all the way up to the very foothills of the Rockies. So pretty interesting there to see how those particular areas, one that's probably pretty commonly looked at, Las Vegas area before urbanization, and then we see the expansion of just what that has looks like, or what that looks like in some of these very rural community or rural areas back 70 years ago to how they've expanded now with a lot of people moving into these particular areas. So that's the piece that looks at just how populations have changed. The last one then, cropland expansion, a couple of different examples of this as well. Southwest Kansas, something that we're pretty familiar with. If we look at the 1950s of sand in native vegetation, when we started to tap into the water source that was below the surface, then we started to see cropland and irrigation pivots really starting to dominate that landscape and to be used as a source of food and fiber for people of Kansas and really the world in itself. And so we can see how cropland has really expanded. One of the areas, though, one of the things that has happened in this area is too, is we see a declining water source there, or an underground water source. Some of these pivoted areas or areas that were once irrigated now are struggling with having enough water to continue to be farmed. They don't have enough. Normally, they don't have enough precip on an annual basis from rainfall to support row crops, unless there is irrigation applied to that. So this site or this particular tool shows a lot of different issues with cropland expansion. Certainly in some parts of the country, that has probably changed more drastically than even in Kansas. This example is up in North Dakota. and starting to talk about wetlands. And these are playas, or at least these natural features where there are depressions, closed depressions, where we look at and see a lot of ducks and geese and waterfowl that once used these particular areas. If we expand that over to the far side of that screen, we can see how much that area was covered by water at the surface, and how many of those areas have been dried up or drained or are now being farmed. There's still some remnants of those particular playas or water source depression areas, if you will, but not near like what they once were. So some really good examples of how our landscapes have changed across the U.S. in the last 70 years. We go back up to the top again. We'll look at Landscape Explorer. I'll give you just kind of an example of how to use this, and you've kind of seen that already. But if you want to look at something that you're familiar with, then you can come to this screen, and if you hold the control button down on your keyboard, then just use your roller bar on your mouse. You can zoom into a particular area and see a feature or see some areas where you actually have some knowledge of or an interest of. So in this case, I'll just give you an example of area that I live. We can see a change that has happened here presently in the last 70 years. In my lifetime, I'm 61 years old, and so I've seen some of these changes. This is actually 2 miles west of a little town called Gridley. There was a PL 566, a kind of a watershed structure put in probably in the late 70s, early 80s. If we look at this pre the current date, let me click out of that. So what I did to stop that scroll bar is I just clicked in the middle of that circle, and then I can move the screen however I want there to get it to center so that I can see exactly what I'm trying to see. Again, if I want to zoom in a little bit, just hit the control bar, use your roller on your mouse. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time, depending on how good your internet service is, to really get that image as clear as possible. So you can see that when I grew up in the 60s and 70s, this is where our house was. This was a cropland field, had quite a few trees. This was an old railroad right-of-way. This was a highway, a state highway that came through our part of the country, leaving Gridley and heading towards Madison. So this image, again, was in the late 50s, most likely. And now if we look and see how it has changed in the time that, in my lifetime anyway, get all the way over here to the left. It should refocus here in just a moment, a little bit, or clear up just a little bit. From this is where my original homestead was. My mom and dad built this house in 1988, and so the house has changed. The watershed lake was put in again in the late 70s, early 80s. So you can see not only the presence of water there, but you can see also that some trees that were in this particular area are now gone due to that water source. But where there wasn't trees, here to the left up this draw, now with the presence of water there and a little difference in management, now we have quite a few trees that are invading this wet soil area and up these draws. And so through time, definitely the landscape has changed considerably. And it's interesting to be able to track that over a 70-year period of time. So again, very easy tool to use. Just if you want to scroll out, then sorry. If you want to scroll out, just I'm not doing a very good job there. There we go. I could scroll back out to any particular area, another area where there was a pretty major structure put in to control flooding in our area. This is John Redmond Reservoir. We look at this prior to, we see that a lot of farm ground. This was the city of Burlington. It flooded in the 50s, and so a major reservoir was built in this particular area where my cursor is, and that altered that particular landscape considerably. Then after that, to my right there in this area, this is Wolf Creek Nuclear Plant, where there is a cooling lake there as well. But look on the upper end of this particular reservoir, the amount of woody expansion just because of the floodwater impact when this reservoir receives a lot of moisture, typically in the spring months, but sometimes in other times of the year. We get water back up in here, and then these saturated soils become a really good location for woody expansion to occur. Again, I can zoom into some of these areas and really see how they have changed more drastically than maybe at that really zoomed out view. So look at this Buffalo Creek area here as I move across it, how much woody expansion has really become an issue in some of these particular areas. Again, this area right here, you can see quite a bit of woody expansion again. And so it's an issue in just about every part of the state, not just in the eastern half, but we're seeing a lot of woody expansion even into the western third of the state as well. So I think that is probably as much as you may want to know about looking at that particular tool.